Today's question is whether or not there's such thing as a YouTube special frame and whether or not the YouTube celebrities are shilling Chinese products. In this case, I'd like to share my experiences with you of the Winspace SLC 3.
This would be my dream compromise bike. There is no way in heck I'm going to pay $17,000 to $18,000 for a Jure spec specialized tarmac SL8. I'll consider this the benchmark. The issue with buying a bike like this is you're locked into some pretty expensive components. As an example, these are the specs you'd get for handlebars and cranks for a 56 centimeter bike. Of course, everyone is running 42 centimeter wide bars now. But don't worry, if you want to go narrower, it's really cheap for you to replace it like for like. Also, most people are going to shorter cranks now. So that 172.5 crank in a 56 centimeter, don't worry, it'll be really cheap to replace it either with a single side or dual sided power meter. Now let me tell you where I finally lost it on the spec on this bike. Remember, 11,500 smackaroos. Apparently Specialized has forgotten about current tire trends. So that's going to cost you an extra $200 right there once you put on your GP 5000s. The next thing is, apparently rim widths are getting wider, but Specialized is still here back in about 2022. Let's look at the hubs. The way I read this without further information is that these are DT Swiss internals with Specialized pop can metal hub bodies. Specialized has never had a problem with these. Not. The next thing is, and the final thing that made me absolutely lose it, is to remind you, this is an aero bike. Why does it have round spokes on it? But don't worry, if you want to build up the bike yourself, you can either go for the baseline $5,000 Pro frame set or get some of that high quality carbon fiber at 7,000 Canadian dollars. I've been looking at the SLC3 frame set for a while, but a Black Friday sale came up and I used a code on Patrick Leno's review of this frame and ended up getting it for roughly around $1,900 Canadian, which I think converts to 1,400 freedom dollars. I couldn't pass up the deal. In no way am I trying to say that the Winspace is equal to the benchmark SL8. But I can tell you that for the price of the SL8, you can get the Winspace, a group set, and a set of wheels. So how is Winspace to deal with? Included within the price was, I paid via PayPal, and Winspace had a very detailed email out to me within 12 hours, which included my UPS tracking number, and that was easy to follow during the process. It took 22 days for my parcel to arrive from China to British Columbia, Canada. It was really well packaged with high quality cardboard and boxes. Of course, though, with any Chinese product, there was exactly no manual included. Typically, weigh-ins scare me, but not when I'm doing it on merchandise.
After several minutes of trying to balance this, I'll give you the verdict on the bare frame. Not too bad. The uncut fork. seat post with carbon rail clamps, the round rail clamps, rear through axle, front through axle, lower headset bearing, upper headset bearing, and compression wedge, and the headset top cap. So now, if you want to run conventional cables, you use this piece right here they provide. And if you're doing ACR stem, that's a 3 centimeter stack. And to give you an idea, that's another centimeter stack. So they give you a total of 4 centimeters of chimney. And finally, there's the compression bung. Winspace includes your Di2 battery seat post holder, your grommets for conventional Di2 and no cables, the conventional dropout. If you're running Shimano, you can use the dropout which replaces one of the knuckles, direct mount I guess. Seat post binder clamp, and the water bottle bolts. See if I can get those.
If you want, hit pause. This is a summary of everything I've just shown you in the video being weighed. This table shows a comparison with all of the YouTubers that have done an initial review of the Winspace frame. Generally what you'll see here in the data, if you freeze this, is it's relatively consistent. If you look at the bare frame weights plotted up, it makes a lot of sense. There's no indications in this data that there are YouTube special frames being sent out to the important influencers. As I recall, my 2014 Cervelo R5 rim brake bike had a frame weight of roughly 800 grams. That includes everything, because back in the day you were using cables and rim brakes, and there were stops built into the frames, and the cables ran straight through the tubes of the frame from stop to stop. So now the question is, how much additional weight over that original R5 will the Winspace SL3 impose on you? And this is due to the internal cable routing and the fact that there's no guides within the frame. So of course I'm going to put some foam tubes in to avoid it from rattling, particularly considering once I hook everything up, it's not that easy to unhook the brakes or anything. Winspace uses the FSA aerodynamic integrated cable routing, and I'll point out to you, they can't even get the abbreviation right. They forgot the I. Maybe they're trying to lighten it or something. In addition to the 70 grams of weight I pointed out on the previous slide because of the foam tubes, the heavier headset, and the chunky spacers, depending on how you do your ACR, there is a possibility you could add 150 grams to the weight of your bike when you compare it to a conventional lightweight aluminum stem and high-end carbon bar. So you have lots of options as far as the ACR goes. You can use a one-piece integrated. You can use a two-piece integrated, and by that I mean you have a special stem which hooks up with a special handlebar with internal cable routing in it. Or what you could do is you could have a conventional handlebar and then tuck the cables into a slot in the stem to go into the ACR. Or, like I previously pointed out, you can use that special cap and just use a normal lightweight stem and a lightweight handlebar. The issue with the whole thing is that these stems right here have the same weight as hollowed out anvils. I believe that this stem is around 230 grams, and this one that Trek calls lightweight is 190 grams in, let's say, 110 millimeters. The point is, I would either recommend, if you're doing this, is going with a one piece or going with the conventional for weight savings. All obsessed with frame weights, but you got to also look at the collateral damage of disc brakes and this new internal cable routing and how much additional weight it adds to your frame. Just a reminder, before I get into inspecting the bike, I'm not claiming any specific expertise in inspecting bikes and or carbon fiber.
So I'm going to go over my review of this frame, and I'm trying not to repeat what's already obvious that other YouTubers have done. So please, if you're thinking of spending this much money on a Chinese frame, go and look at all the links I provided down below in the comments. They're helpful. So I'll start off my review with the general paint of the frame. Thin, uniform, all good. And I like the way how the stickers are very subtle and you can't really see them in a group ride or anything like that if anyone's going to shame you. The next thing I did is I took a borescope through all the tubes and took cable guides and put them through just to make sure that you can run all your cables. Everything looked good inside. The only thing I found was that there was one tiny ridge right in here at the junction between the head tube and the top tube. Probably something to do with the bags in there or something. I'm not a carbon expert, but it's additional material as opposed to a lack of material, so I'm not concerned. The seat post head may be an issue, as Peak Torque has pointed out, and it will be tested, especially with my girth, when I hit a bump and I'm on the nose of the saddle. So I'll report back to that in a ride review. Nice seat post binder as per Peak Torque. Front derailleur. I took it off, obviously, when I was doing the weighing, and I put a little bit of Loctite on it because Dave Arthur had reported that his came loose during a ride, so fair enough. The bottom bracket. I checked it with just a Dura-Ace cup, and it appears to be relatively round. There was no ovality, but I really can't guarantee with the level of tools I have whether or not the two sides line up, but we'll find out soon enough when I build this up. Everything inside is quite smooth though, no issues. Disc brake mounts, front and rear. They're both machined and sit proud of the actual frame, so nothing, even if you use an adapter, will be resting on any paint. So now looking at the fork. Top internal headset. The bearing sits in here quite tight. Same with the bottom. Pull this off. Here's where the magic happens with the FSA pieces. This piece, which you route the cables around, which compresses the headset, fits rather tight, both to the bearing and to the steerer tube of the fork. If you go on YouTube and do a review, it has been reported that this bearing sometimes does not sit on a round surface, but this is actually ovalized. In my case, that didn't happen. The seat for this bearing was round. Also, I think they've changed how they mask the paint now, so this has been masked off, unlike Peak Torque's fork. Both the front and rear dropouts are well masked with no extra paint in them. Peak Torque brought up that he didn't like this. I don't either, but I'll expand on that. I'm not sure why you basically blind something off when you have literally the head of the bolt is 5 millimeters thick and sticks out that much. And here is the interesting thing. I've got that barely started. One revolution, two revolution. And let's call that 3 to the manufacturer specified torque. Usually when you're doing bolts like this, you want to see 5 to 6 revolutions. And I've checked it on every other bike that I have in my harem, and the minimum I got was 5.5 revolutions. Let's check out the rear. 1, 2, and let's call this 3 1/4, and I'm speccing this to the manufacturer's 10 kilonewton spec. Now, if I do this either front or rear without a hub in here, I can go about 4 turns or 4.5 turns deep. My suspicion is Winspace got this wrong. They were aiming for 5 to 6 and then put a big, larger spacer in here to make sure that the through axle wouldn't bottom out when the consumer was tightening it. Let's talk about tire clearance. So what we've got here is a 32 mil wide Connie Gator skin on a 25 mil internal gravel rim from our friends at We Are One. As you can see in the front, there's exactly no clearance issues, and this may even be considered all-road type clearance. Now, if you go to the back, on the same rim and same tire, you get about 4 mils on either side. So it's kind of getting close, especially if you have a wobble in the tire, which this one does, and or if your rim goes out of true. So I would suggest to you, like if you're going 32 millimeter tires with your standard 23 to 24 mil rim, that's probably the limit in the rear. So to wrap this thing up, I want to conclude that this frame, which costs as much as this German precision 4-legged security system, appears to be as what's represented by the YouTubers when you review their videos. The weights make sense. The quality of the frame appears as is represented in other videos. Now, whether or not there's some fatal flaw in this, it'll take some time to tell by test riding it. But at this point, I can personally say I'm really happy with my purchase. I plan to do 2 more videos as part of this project. One of them is going to be on component selection and building this frame up, and the other one will be after a long-term test ride. And don't worry, it's not going to be an initial ride presentation. I'm probably going to at least put, let's say, 2,000 kilometers on it before I report back. Also, I may do some other smaller videos, as an example, comparing Hambini to Shimano. You never know.